Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. My name is Isidoro Hasbun, joining you from the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. It's a pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar, Safeguarding Nature's Heartlands, Advancing Areas of Importance for Biodiversity Under 30 by 30. So before we begin, live interpretation is both available in English, French, Spanish, as well as in Portuguese. You can find interpretation options on the bottom right corner on the ellipsis, and then click your preferred language for interpretation. And please do let us know if there are any issues there. So, briefly, let me outline the run of show so you know what you can expect over the next hour. So, we will begin with a global framing presentation by Andy Plumptre, followed by three complementary perspectives. First, a national example from Mozambique, then a partner's tech perspective from Google Earth, and then a national example from Canada. After these four presentations, we will move into an open Q&A session for HAC members and partners to discuss this topic of import. So as we all know, Target 3 emphasizes not only the need to protect land, waters, and seas 30% by 2030, but also particular importance for the right areas for biodiversity and ecosystem functions. So today's session is designed for countries to strengthen this essential part of particular areas of importance for biodiversity, identifying, recognizing, and safeguarding AIBs, including KBAs. So let me briefly introduce our speakers. I have Dr. Andrew Plumptre, head of the Key Biodiversity Areas Secretariat, Hermenegildo Matimele, Marine Program Director of WCS Mozambique, Tanya Birch, Senior Program Manager, Google Earth Outreach, and Dr. Sierra Bratza-Pern, Director of Key Biodiversity Areas, WCS Canada. We have a busy schedule this morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. And thank you all for joining us. So let me begin by the global framing. Again, the first speaker, Dr. Andrew Plumptre, will set the stage and will walk us through the role of KBAs. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Are you seeing that screen okay? Try and put it on full frame.
Yes, I would just also click, yes, perfect now.
Okay. So as I was introduced, I head what's something called the Key Biodiversity Areas Secretariat, which works for the 13 Key Biodiversity Area partners. And that partnership is working with governments around the world to roll out a program of identifying and updating KBA networks. The aim of what I want to talk about in the session today is basically show how key biodiversity areas are being used to guide the 30 by 30 target of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, highlight the need for all countries to be updating their KBA networks and why. And then there's a couple of case studies that showcase how countries are doing that from Mozambique and Canada, and also identifying the need to be able to monitor KBAs using remote sensing. So just to remind everyone, the mission, the goal A, target 1 and target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Targets 1 and 3 reference areas of high biodiversity importance or especially areas of particular importance for biodiversity. And the reason they highlight that text is because we're trying to stop human-induced extinction of known threatened species in Goal A, and halt and reverse biodiversity loss in the overall mission. So unless we put our 30 by 30 in the right places, we're clearly not going to have that overall impact in the goal and the mission. And so that's why it's clearly very important to put the 30 by 30 in the right places. And key biodiversity areas are one tool that can be used by governments to help guide where that should be. So the criteria used to identify key biodiversity areas were published in 2016. There's 11 quantitative criteria, and unlike many of the other different approaches that are used to identify important sites for biodiversity, they use quantitative criteria, which means that a KBA is comparable in any country across the world. So it allows comparisons between sites and regions, and as a result, it's been picked up and is being used as a standard metric for sites of importance for biodiversity in the Sustainable Development Goals. The Global Biodiversity Framework is also being used in CMS and Ramsar conventions and other multilateral environmental processes, as well as by industry. So those KBA criteria can be couched in 5 overarching sort of focuses of conservation. So threatened biodiversity, which is what many countries often think about, but also endemic species and geographically restricted biodiversity, sites of outstanding ecological integrity, and ecological integrity was a key term that was integrated into the Global Biodiversity Framework this time around. Biological processes, so important areas for breeding or migratory stopover sites where you get aggregations of species at some place, and then sites of outstanding irreplaceability. So you have to conserve those sites if you're going to conserve that species, because you can't conserve them anywhere else. But an important thing about KBAs, which makes them different from things like hotspots and ecoregions, is that they have to be a site. A geographical area of land that's potentially manageable as a single unit. So who might manage it? Is it a local community? Is it a private landowner? Is it a government authority? Is it a protected area already and recognized as such? So different ways KBAs can be managed. We don't, sorry, the phone going off. We don't determine what should happen at a KBA. It doesn't have to become a protected area. In fact, some sites in southern Africa are farmland where birds come and feed in winter, and there's no way you'd ever make that a protected area. But they can potentially become OECMs. So KBAs can be useful in helping decide where you might put OECMs. So why would you use KBAs and not another system? So they're globally significant sites for conservation, and they're globally significant because you have above a certain percentage of the global population of a species at the site, or above a certain percentage of the global extent of an ecosystem at a site, or it's an outstanding site for ecological integrity or irreplaceability. So every country is going to have sites that are nationally important or regionally important also. But what KBAs help you identify is which sites are globally important and for which your country has a significant role in playing in the conservation of that species or the ecosystem. Most countries have KBAs already in them. The Important Bird Areas Program, the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Program, the Alliance for Zero Extinction Program have all identified sites which are in the World Database of KBAs. But for many of those countries, it is just the important bird areas, and so only birds have been assessed. So there's a need to update the KBA networks in all countries. And we recently published a paper from 11 countries which have done such an update. And what we showed in general is that there's been a 70% increase in the number of KBAs in those countries on average, but more than nearly 160% increase in the total area of KBAs in those countries. And about half of those new KBAs were more of the extent of them was outside the protected area network than inside the protected area network. So effectively, where you make these comprehensive assessments, there's been about a doubling of the area and extent of the KBAs in those countries, which means that where we haven't done it, we're probably missing about half our KBAs. The World Database, the KBAs, holds all the data on the KBAs. The current number in there, 16,602, used to be dominated by birds, but actually, if you see on this pie chart on the right, plants now have more KBA trigger species than the birds, which are the greens, the plants are the dark blue. So it's becoming more equitable in terms of the biodiversity in it. In each country where we work to support KBA assessments, we encourage the formation of a KBA National Coordination Group, and you'll hear more about that from Canada and Mozambique. But ideally, they're composed with members from government, the conservation sector, scientific experts. Some countries also include representatives of indigenous peoples and local communities, sometimes the private sector. And forming these groups helps bring the data together, get it shared, helps in the whole identification of the KBAs, and there's much greater ownership of the KBAs at a national level, and work then subsequently goes on to try and conserve them. Currently, we have about 45 KBA national coordination groups across the world, the green countries there. The ones that are orangey are in the process of establishing KBA national coordination groups, and then the yellow ones are where there's been some interest from conservation partners in those countries in working to establish a group. KBAs are being used by a lot of different groups. So for governments, they're using it for guiding their 30 by 30 planning. They're also using it to help guide where they might establish OECMs, using it in their spatial planning for Target 1 in particularly, and also using it to establish offset targets in some countries. In the private sector, there are several different performance standards and environmental standards which recognize KBAs as critical habitat, which means that companies have to minimize their impacts on those sites and make sure that they have no negative impacts on the species or the ecosystem that trigger KBA status. Donors are using KBAs to guide where they're going to put their funding. The latest GF9 has a lot of language around KBAs, and they will only fund new protected areas if they meet the global KBA status. And then finally, conservation organizations are using KBAs also to guide their activities. As I mentioned, the private sector, there's a list here of different places where KBAs are being used. In the European Union, KBAs are recognized in the EU taxonomy and the environmental status and reporting standards, which means that companies now are legally mandated to report on the impacts on KBAs across Europe. All of the data provided to business through the integrated biodiversity assessment tool, which packages it in formats and reports that are useful to companies so that they can report to Performance Standard 6 or to TNFD, SBTN, and other these reporting standards. KBAs aren't just relevant to Target 1 and 3, though. They can be used in Target 2 to guide where you might target restoration initially, because restoring KBAs means you're restoring a globally significant site. In terms of helping halt extinctions under Target 4, helping in terms of mainstreaming, if you have a good KBA network and you use that map, you can use that map to actually mainstream biodiversity into the policy and practice of other government departments and institutions. And similarly, the Target 15 business to reduce and disclose their impacts, KBAs, as I said, are already being used for that. And the whole process of compiling the data to update your KBA networks actually meets one of the requirements of Target 21, which is to make biodiversity data available and use it for conservation planning. Just to finish, we recently completed a revision of the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans across countries. Sadly, despite it being a year after the deadline to submit those action plans, less than 40% of most areas of the world have submitted their NBSAPs to date. And in terms of the online reporting tool targets, the ORT targets on these, the green bars, only Africa has more countries than 50% that have submitted their targets. If you look at how KBAs are being referenced in these, in some areas of the world, KBAs aren't doing too bad. So about half of sites in Africa, half of countries in Africa and the Americas, Middle East, referencing KBAs, but Europe in particular is lagging behind, and also Central and East Asia. So those are two areas that we're keen to focus on. So some of the key messages, we need to make sure that we put the 30 by 30 in the right place if we're going to actually achieve the mission and the goals. KBAs provide one of the best global data sets that actually identifies areas of particular importance, which is why it's a disaggregation of the headline indicator for Target 3. And KBA identification should ideally be a key activity of projects supporting Target 1 and Target 3 of the Global Biodiversity Framework between now and 2030. And we're calling on all countries to update their networks by then. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Indeed, the broadening and incorporation of KBAs in a wide set of elements and actions is key to this issue. And it's really surprising to see, for example, how the private sector is engaging in this space as well. Let me move on to a national example on Mozambique. Again, Mozambique has been actively applying KBAs and spatial planning and using them as a foundation for Target 3 implementation. So we're pleased to welcome Hermenegildo Matimele from WCS Mozambique to share the country's experiences integrating KBAs into policy and decision making. Hermenegildo, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Isidore, for this opportunity and for giving a chance Mozambique to share all the work that has been done on the KBAs to advance the 30 by 30. So this talk is going to focus on incorporating KBAs into policy and spatial planning. Andrew has already initiated and has set the tone on discussing the main steps that are relevant to take to conduct this process. So the initial one being creation of national coordination group. So this outline here is just a summary of the process that Mozambique, or the main steps that Mozambique had to follow. Of course, this to some extent was adjusted to our context. There is a guideline which provides all the details in terms of steps to be followed. But establishing a national coordination group is key, and has already explained on that, but also training to ensure that there's a capacity in the country needed to go through the process of applying the criteria and also conduct the boundary delineation, ensuring that you come up with a management unit in the end. So this is a summary of all the steps that were taken into consideration, including data mobilization, engaging with several stakeholders to make sure that that process is inclusive. And our NCG has more of 20 representatives as part of that, from the public sector, private sector, and civil society as well included. And through that process, Mozambique identified 29 KBAs. There was one already identified by ICEN, which was Lake Nyasa, and it covered 180 species. They were mostly plants, thanks to the Important Plant Areas initiative that had already advanced a lot, plus other projects like Sabonate, working closely in the region with Sambi. So Mozambique had advanced a lot in mobilizing plant data, undertake release assessment for those plants, and feed that information, make that information available for different use, mostly triggered under criterion B1, suggesting that a lot of those species are endemic. Currently, there's a spatial biodiversity assessment, planning and prioritization, which is another regional project, which is going to advance with more areas becoming KBAs in the near future. This is just one example, which is Mount Namul, where we have a number of species. And as I mentioned, plants, they're always at the top with 14 plants, a lot of endemic species there in central Mozambique. Just a highlight to show one of example in the region. This information could be found through SIBMOS. SIBMOS is a sort of, it's equivalent to clearinghouse mechanism in Mozambique. It's an official portal of the government to share biodiversity information, and all these reports are available. But there's also a video on KBAs in Mozambique. It's important to highlight that this process had a buy-in at high level. So this was the official ceremony to endorse the KBAs, which were led by the then Minister of Environment, Yvette Maibas, of that time. So this is really important because having buy-in from high level, it helps to move on with next steps, which I'm going to share with you, which is the integration of KBAs, international legislation, and spatial plans. There are two main documents to consider here. One is the Marine Spatial Planning and the National Territorial Development Plan. Both of these documents, they highlight KBAs as areas that should be avoided for development. And we have also used the Key Biodiversity Areas to inform different scenarios for expansion of marine protected areas. So we have here 3 scenarios, one suggesting expansion of 7 to 8%, and second up to 12 and then to 30%. These scenarios locked in the KBAs in the smart conservation planning approach. So you lock the KBA in so that they account to the results that you get. So this is how they were used for the marine context. And the government currently has developed a strategy to inform expansion of MPAs as a whole. And they have selected the second scenario as a scenario that we're working towards achieving it by 2030. When it comes to legislation, there are a number of decrees that have come out resulting from this since the KBAs were endorsed in 2021. So in 2022, we have this ministerial diploma on biodiversity offsets, which outlines how the KBA should be taken into consideration when it comes to development projects and biodiversity offsets. So KBAs are biodiversity offset receiving areas, and also should be to make sure that there's a net gain of 15%. So this is one of the achievement. Apart from that, the KBAs have also been recognized as protection zones for birds, but also for their habitats. So in those areas, development should be careful, should be thoughtful, where possible, avoid it. And also there's a national coordination of KBA, so it's recognized within this decree as well, which is really important to make sure that the NCG is highly regarded in the country and it can contribute to help Mozambique shape the direction towards achieving the 30 by 30, for example. We have currently the forest law, which was developed and published recently since 2023. It does consider that KBAs should be, those that they contain forests should be looked carefully and possibly consider them for conservation moving forward. And there are different approaches now. Andrew has already mentioned the OECMs, that's one level, but also community managed areas, that's an opportunity there. And we have used the KBAs to assist analysis on social vulnerability for initiatives aimed at oil and gas, to make sure that decisions on those assessments are well informed with information based on where key areas are found throughout the country. And also it provides insights in terms of what should be considered when an area is a KBA and it has to go through an oil and gas or other resources exploitation moving forward. So these are some of the legislation, policy related materials that Mozambique has integrated as part of the key biodiversity areas. And thank you. Back to you, Isidoro.
Excellent. Thank you, Hermenegildo, for the comprehensive overview and the robust policies taking place in Mozambique and that process of development. Really interesting case. So our next presentation brings into this conversation the technology dimension, partnership dimension. We have Tanya Birch from Google Earth Outreach, who will walk us through how geospatial tools can support identification, visualization, and use of AIBs, and how Google's technology is enabling countries to move faster and with greater precision. And of course, thanking her because it's quite an early wake up.
We appreciated the talks about the KBAs and the implementation in Mozambique. This is going to be a little bit of a reflection on the state of the art of geospatial AI and how it could be applied in the sense of 30 by 30 and the Global Biodiversity Framework. So as many of you know, there's been this explosion of Earth observation data since the 1960s, and especially since 1984 with the emergence of the Landsat and Sentinel constellations. Google reacted to that or sort of responded to that by, in 2010 at COP16, we launched Google Earth Engine as the first cloud native planetary scale geospatial analysis platform. And that was because it was extremely difficult to be able to access all of that treasure trove of satellite imagery and analyze it over time. So we brought it all into the Google data centers that were powering your search, your everyday search, and we built it we built this platform from the ground up to support global environmental MRV of forests and freshwater resources and agriculture, even urban development, land cover change, but really, we had a big investment in environmental monitoring over time. And now we have more than 90 petabytes of Earth science data available. It grows by a petabyte a month for scientists to develop these new methodologies and share these with practitioners that power real world applications. And one of the first things that we did was we brought the images together and we stitched them into a zoomable 3D video called Earth Time Lapse for anyone to explore. So this allowed everyone to really see the change happening across the planet. And it was just, this flood of geospatial data that continues to build today. And the challenge is to find the right insights and information at the right time. So it's been, we've powered a lot of, our community of practitioners and scientists have powered, or have been producing geospatial analysis using all of the world's publicly available satellite data. And the part that I find the most rewarding and the most sort of, exciting is that this data drives decisions that leads to action. And the first paper using Earth Engine produced this high resolution map of forest change for the entire world. It's got probably, by the time of this writing, over 6,000 citations to date. And this data set became the foundation of a platform called Global Forest Watch, which now provides weekly alerts on new deforestation events, like in the Amazon, so authorities can take rapid action. Another group of researchers used the platform and the technology to produce a blueprint of where the highest conservation value sites might be, opportunities for new protected areas, NOECMs, and this was right prior to the signing of the Global Biodiversity Framework to inspire people and give people a sort of spatial context and an idea, as we were talking about protecting 30% of the planet, where those areas might be, including the Alliance for Zero Extinction sites, the KBAs, large mammal landscapes, and so forth. And that was produced using this technology. But I'm going to switch a little bit now to talk about some of the latest advancements, I'm here in Silicon Valley, and AI is a big thing for us. And it's also really, really novel innovation around geospatial AI and the promise of geospatial AI to support these countries that are, many of us that are struggling to figure out the intersection between, how we can advance the submission of more NBSAPs for the Global Biodiversity Framework, because, as Andrew rightly said, it's been slow, but we see that growing over time. But so we've been looking at how we can support. And this year, Google DeepMind announced a new approach to geospatial AI that we're calling Alpha Earth Foundations. It's designed to make multi-sensor data streams easier to access through annual embeddings. And I'm going to explain what that means in a little bit. But it's a new AI model for generating geospatial embeddings from multi-source, so think Landsat and Sentinel and a number of other data streams, and multimodal data streams. It's able to take a sequence of images of anywhere on Earth and transform them into this compact 64 number vector, or that can coordinate, or like a coordinate that describes and summarizes surface properties and environmental conditions over any
de
time
64
period,
números.
day to a year.
Ou
But what exactly does that mean, and how do you make use of it? Well, the fundamental question we were asking ourselves was, again, like it was, we've been hosting all of these data sets from monitoring the globe at varying resolutions and revisit time, but we were seeing that it requires a PhD level of experience, not only now in remote sensing, but now also in machine learning with the advancements of all of these technologies. So the question was, could we distill the wealth of all of this information into a single data set using AI to be able to find patterns across these different data sets at a pixel level through space and time, and accelerate the work that researchers, government agencies, and geospatial customers make to make better maps. Some of the input data that goes into the model is the optical data from Sentinel-2 and Landsat thermal, C-band radar from Sentinel-1, L-band radar from ALOS Pulsar, elevation data from Copernicus, LiDAR returns from JEDI, climate data. We even have some geotag text from Wikipedia articles joined with information from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, or GBIF, the species occurrence records. But really the question is, okay, how do you use that? And this is where Earth Engine comes in, because the output of Alpha Earth Foundations is the satellite embeddings data set. And it's an annual data set of these learned features for accelerating Earth observation workflows at a 10-meter resolution. And it's one of the largest data sets of its kind, with over 1.4 trillion embedding footprints per year. But you can think of embedding images like an AI-powered image composite. There's this general foundation on which a lot of different Earth observation applications can be built. And it goes back to through 2017, following the Sentinel data set. So I'm gonna try and not go too deep into the technical details, and I wanted to present an early use case, an early user, and that is the Global Ecosystems Atlas from the Group on Earth Observations. And it's an initiative that's aiming to create the first comprehensive resource to help countries map and monitor the world's ecosystems. And they're using the satellite embedding data set to help classify unmapped ecosystems into these categories according to the IUCN Global Ecosystem Typology at level 3. And it's a first of this kind resource to play a critical role in helping countries better prioritize these conservation areas and optimize restoration efforts, and ultimately combat the loss of biodiversity. I also want to point to another early user. This was Google Research, was piloting a new method of graph neural networks to advance the field of species distribution models. And this graph neural net approach combines multiple open data sets of field observations of species, combines that with these satellite embeddings from Alpha Earth Foundations, and brings in species trait information. So they released just a few weeks ago 23 of these species maps over Australia and launched it in the UN Biodiversity Lab, as well as Earth Engine, and there's more coming next year. So most of what I've been talking about so far is about pushing the frontier of geospatial AI and then making that accessible to science, scientists and researchers. But not all of us need or can use these geospatial analysis tools. So today, Google Earth provides this incredibly comprehensive and up-to-date understanding of the real world, combining aerial photography, satellite imagery, 3D topography, geographic data, and street view into this canvas that you can explore our ever-changing planet. And new features that are integrating AI capabilities are already released in experimental mode. And there's going to be more in there that sort of integrates some of this science applications and AI foundations that I talked about earlier into Google Earth and making that more available to non-coders. So just to wrap up, there's, Earth Engine is this open, free to use for academic use cases. There's also a commercial offering, planetary scale geospatial analysis platform to quantify changes on the Earth. Alpha Earth Foundations, it acts like a virtual satellite that's learned these patterns across a variety of different data streams. Google Earth is, everybody's sort of familiar with Google Earth, right? But we're investing a lot more into how to really make it useful for things like protection, protecting and conservation of the planet. And then this sneak peek around, our sort of we're investing and supporting in the Global Ecosystems Atlas. And we're also beginning to build tools to help accelerate the reporting of things like the Red List of Ecosystem assessments, because we understand that's still quite challenging, and we're producing open source packages to be able to facilitate the reporting of that easier. And my main sort of question back to you, I don't know if we're with a packed agenda, we have time for Q&A, or you can contact me through Isidoro. Is how we can, help you accelerate the reporting of your biodiversity areas and your 30 by 30 areas. We really stand as a partner with you and with the High Ambition Coalition in bringing all of this incredible science and research and data, and now, increasingly AI, to make it easier to produce those national reports. So thank you again for having me, and I'm excited to see the next presentation.
Excellent, fascinating use of data sets. Tanya, a lot of questions already in the chat, and I think it'll be an opportune moment to respond these in the Q&A, and also, if possible, if you can share the PowerPoint, and we can share it to the guests of the conversation. So on to our final country perspective, our last speaker. We have Dr. Chiara Razzo-Kern, who will share lessons and approaches that may be relevant for many HAC members and of our partners. Chiara, over to you.
Thank you very much. You can see my screen? It's good. All right. Thank you. So that was an exciting presentation. Thank you, Tanya. And Canada is actually at the stage now. We've identified most of our key biodiversity areas, and we're on to trying to figure out how to monitor a network of about 1,000 key biodiversity areas across the country. And so we're looking at the kinds of tools that you've talked about. One of the sets of key biodiversity areas that we're still working on, though, are ecosystems, because we do not have a fully classified and mapped set of ecosystems in Canada. So we're making progress, but that's another thing that I'm very interested in exploring. But right now, for this presentation, I'm going to take a step back and talk a little bit about the process that we've used in Canada that was highly collaborative and highly participatory. and talk about lessons there for people who might be interested in identifying key biodiversity areas in their own countries. So one thing to just note is that this is an extremely good tool, and there's growing appreciation for how good a tool key biodiversity areas are in Canada and hopefully globally. It's quantitative and standardized, and it turns out there aren't that many other biodiversity data sets that are like that across the world. So one of the things, though, that we had to do in Canada to make it even more relevant was to develop a national key biodiversity area standard, which is a very conservative adaptation of the global standard. So we use the global standard to identify global KBAs and this national adaptation to identify national KBAs. And really the thresholds and the criteria remain the same, but we consider taxonomic units below the species level, for example, because those are conservation priorities in Canada. And the Canadian approach, right from the beginning, we knew that there's biodiversity experts across the country, provinces and territories at the subnational scale have a whole lot of tools that they use themselves. So we thought, okay, we don't want this to be just a data exercise. We want to make sure that people find this work relevant and they understand why it will be useful in their own decisions and in their own programs and policies. So there was a lot of outreach for the first many number of years, and in fact, that's still ongoing, to involve as many people as possible. And to date now, so we've been doing this for about 6 years, thousands of experts and stakeholders and rights holders have been involved in this process. It's fully transparent. We have very open dialogues with people about how this is relevant or not to their work and how it can be complementary. We're trying to do this work in as comprehensive a way as possible so that we can have a complete data set for the areas of importance for biodiversity across the country. And because the Key Biodiversity Area Standard looks at a whole lot of different biodiversity values, it is quite a comprehensive tool. And then to make it as relevant as possible, that's where, again, the outreach comes in so that we can be aware of existing processes and talk to people across regions. So we had a very regional approach to see, well, how do we even communicate or to build this participatory process in a different way in different places where different expectations and needs are present. So I won't dwell too long on this, but just this is an idea of our structure. And so this is akin to the National Coordination Group, and we call it different things. But just to say, the steering committee is open to all national organizations. The federal government in Canada is a very important partner in this work. They saw the value in doing this work and have provided support as well as expertise and data. Most of the big NGOs are involved. And then lots of independent scientists and knowledge holders across the country from academic institutions, etc. And it's WCS Canada, Birds Canada, and NatureServe Canada who are coordinating all of this work. So I'm going to just focus on one aspect in terms of the outreach, but it's just an example of how we've talked to different end users and different partners and collaborators. A very important partner in Canada, or really set of thousands of partners, are Indigenous nations across the country. So we, from the beginning again, and this was a challenge because the Key Biodiversity Area tool is a global, top-down, Western science-based tool. And so how do you make that relevant to Indigenous communities where conservation is generally occurring at the local scale and local priorities are not necessarily the same as global priorities? But there is generally, and we found out almost always, an appreciation of the need to look across scales and to see where there is alignment. So we've had national and regional workshops for Indigenous participants, many meetings. We have Indigenous representation on the KBA steering committee, lots of contracts and honoraria to compensate for time and contributions. We've had a variety of inputs from Indigenous collaborators. In some cases, there was no interest, and that's fine, or no capacity. But in many cases, what we discussed was, how to delineate sites, how to describe sites in a way that was culturally meaningful, the names of KBAs in Indigenous languages, reviewing of proposals, etc. So that was there was a lot of interest along these various lines. So to date, we've reached out to 556 First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities or organizations. And we've met with about 42% of these communities or organizations. The rest we've had email correspondence with, but this is an ongoing work. And one of the things that we also emphasize is that because timelines are often fast when you're doing science and you have funding for a specific amount of time, for Indigenous collaborators or people who are interested in the process, the timeline never runs out. So even after a Key Biodiversity Area is published, if at that point an Indigenous community would like to provide input, it is open to them to do so, and we are committed to then revising the site if additional information comes to light. And KBAs overlap with interests sometimes, not always. So we provide a forum to highlight information about places that communities and groups want to see shared, and they're sharing that at the national level, but also at the global level. So there is that appreciation for this global link in our work. So we're doing it, it's a national process, but it's linked to things going on across the world. So just a few examples I've left here of how Key Biodiversity Areas are being used by Indigenous organizations, consulting firms, and Indigenous communities as well, including through the support of proposals for new Indigenous protected and conserved areas, for example, or within prioritization and planning. It supports referrals, which is when there's new oil and gas or mining projects, and those descriptions are sent to Indigenous communities, and they are using Key Biodiversity Areas to see whether ecological or cultural areas of importance might be impacted by new development. I'm not going to go through the process of identifying a Key Biodiversity Area in detail, but just to say this is our process, and we probably the most time-consuming part of our process are the various review parts. So we have regional experts across the country, and they work with taxonomic and ecosystem experts at every stage in our process, from scoping to figure out where there might be Key Biodiversity Areas, to the review at the end. We get expert input, and we're focusing on a lot of biodiversity data. I'm not talking about biodiversity data too much, but that biodiversity data is a huge part of this, and collating it and gathering it and managing that data and keeping it up to date is a very important process that actually has led to other products too in Canada. So there are many additional outputs from just organizing a Key Biodiversity Area program in a country. So here we are at this point. We have about 354 Key Biodiversity Areas that are published in Canada, and another 400 that are in review. You'll see that they span the entire country. There's some blank spots that will be filled up with criterion C Key Biodiversity Areas for high ecological integrity. That work is progressing steadily, but slowly, because that's where many First Nations live. And so it's an opportunity to work with them to define what are the most important aspects of ecological integrity. We've seen now that we've identified most of these Key Biodiversity Areas that it's important to do an analysis of this. And this is also where some of these interesting data tools that Tanya was talking about will be useful, because as we look at the Key Biodiversity Areas, and we've identified them for a huge range of species, and now 7 ecosystems so far. So 761 species meet KBA criteria so far, and 7 ecosystems again so far, and that will grow quite a bit in the coming year or so. We're trying to figure out how we align with different programs and policies that already exist, both at the national level in Canada and then also provincial and territorial level. So we're seeing that a great number of species at risk that are legislated in Canada are captured by Key Biodiversity Areas. We're also seeing, as we look at land tenure and figure out, well, what are some conservation pathways for each of these key biodiversity areas, that there are key biodiversity areas on public land, private land, indigenous lands, in remote areas, agricultural, urban, peri-urban, in parks, in protected areas. So each one needs to be protected in the same way, but the monitoring is now a major priority, because where better to monitor your biodiversity than in the network of 1,000 sites that are most important for stopping biodiversity loss. So we only have 6% of key biodiversity areas in Canada that are fully protected, and there are 37% that are fully unprotected, and then the rest may have bits and pieces that are protected, so anywhere from 6% to 37%. I just wanted to also mention that growing awareness of biodiversity is also an important thing that KBA work can accomplish. So we've run 3 years of photo contest, a key biodiversity area photo contest, where entries have to be taken within key biodiversity areas. And they're so beautiful that I wanted to share a few. So this is in Grasslands National Park, key biodiversity area. Sable Island Key Biodiversity Area. This one too is Sable Island. We have hundreds and hundreds now of these photos from key biodiversity areas from amateur photographers across the country, and lots of interest from local media and regional media and national media about sites and species and ecosystems that people don't necessarily think about. So we have key biodiversity areas for polar bears and caribou and belugas, but also for the blue-gray tail dropper slug, which most people didn't know about, but is just as spectacular as a beluga. So we have a national database. So in addition to the world database on key biodiversity areas, where you'll find all the global key biodiversity areas, we needed to build our own database so that we could have the global KBAs and the national key biodiversity areas side by side, fully searchable with lots of information and metadata, and it's free to download all the information there. And we're already seeing, this was our list of ways that key biodiversity areas could feed into policies and plans. And we've already gone through some of these things. As Andy said, key biodiversity areas can fit into almost all of the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. We need to always be thinking, are we targeting the places that are of highest importance for biodiversity? And I think that we don't always do that. So the federal government is fully on board with this, and looking at key biodiversity areas to advance Canada's 30 by 30 progress. So KBAs are an important tool to guide the selection of future protected areas in conjunction with other sources of information. This will require that Canada first seek Governor and Council approval to acquire lands wholly or partially within key biodiversity areas. And Canada will integrate KBAs in land use planning too, by using collaborative biodiversity-focused approaches and planning for land and sea use changes at the right geographic scale, with participation from all levels of government and Indigenous rights holders. And this is, I'm just finishing up here, so hopefully we'll have time for a few questions, but KBAs are being taken up by a range of users. Andy went through some of these too, but here are some concrete examples. We have other NGOs like Tree Canada focusing on KBAs as the core of connectivity work that they're doing. A lot of support for Indigenous-led conservation. We have a number of donors and large foundations in Canada that are targeting their funding for conservation to proposals within key biodiversity areas. Quebec, the province where I live, lists KBAs as a target for OECMs and for selection of new protected areas officially. So there's a great embrace of this tool there too, and growing embrace. We're seeing new examples of how KBAs are being used pretty much every week. So we think that these are a model. It turns out, as I said before, that there aren't that many other biodiversity indicators that are standardized, comprehensive, easy to use, entirely transparent. and they capture a range of biodiversity values. It's a big deal, and we think that we need to develop other complementary biodiversity indicators in the same way as the KBA's standard has been developed in order to capture some of the other priorities in Canada, like sites of importance for human well-being, like ecosystem service sites and biocultural value areas, areas important for maintaining processes like connectivity, and areas of high carbon storage, such as peatlands that may or may not be captured by KBAs. So I'll end there. Thank you to all of the people who have been involved in KBA work in Canada.
Thanks so much, Sierra. Let's open the floor to Q&A. I think because of time, we have about space for 2-3 questions, and I would love for the audience and especially HACC members to ask questions, seeing how KBAs orient themselves to government's priorities. So let's open the floor to questions from the audience.
I'll just step in if that's all right. Olaf Jensen with Environment Canada, and just say thank you to all the presenters for the excellent presentations. Kara, it's always good to see you emphasizing how much the KBAs are being integrated into the Canadian decision making, and it's great to see how this is connecting with the work globally on key biodiversity areas. So I have lots of questions I could ask, but just want to say thank you to the presenters.
Thank you all.
I know we only have a minute, but I was curious if there is talk between Google Alpha Earth and Andy about speeding up the identification of KBAs in countries where they have not been comprehensively assessed.
Rachel, I don't know if it's only me, but this might be the audio is a bit choppy.
So sorry, I had my mic in the wrong location. I put my question in the chat. Question about whether Alpha Earth and the KBA partnership are working together to identify KBAs.
I can take a first crack at that, and then Andy, go ahead.
Go ahead, Tanya.
We've been talking actually with Stu Butchert about and the team about getting allowing our users access to the KBAs through Google Earth Engine. We have supported the world database of KBAs. There was some Earth Engine integration in there. But I think that's just the beginning. We sort of just started to scratch the surface. So I would really welcome more of that in the future. And Andy, maybe we can follow up with Stu offline.
I was going to say there've been several meetings where we've interacted and discussed about how to use remote sensing to monitor KBAs, and we're building at the moment a monitoring platform on the world database of KBAs. And once that's established, what would be really good is to be getting some of these products that come out of your system integrated into that. So we have the sort of platform ready to go. It's just now deciding on which of the product. And one of the issues we've often had is, as you said, we had access to satellite imagery for free, but not the capability to process it. And so now some of these tools are becoming available. That ability to process it and then get the information into the monitoring platform is what's really useful.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think one of the challenges is there's been such a wealth of Earth observation remote sensing data, but a lot less in situ and field-based data that, or if it does exist, it's often, in a silo or not accessible, not easily accessible. So that's one thing that we're also looking to support more of, is how do you share, local biodiversity data or if not share it, just analyze it and be able to integrate it into these systems like KBAs and, ultimately include them in national reports as the source of truth of where biodiversity is occurring.
The idea of this platform will be that people from the ground can submit data on monitoring the species that trigger KBA status, threats to those species, and what conservation actions are happening. So we should, long term, once the data builds up, be able to integrate the two from the top down and from the bottom up. Hermenegildo, did you want?
Yep.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to follow on with Tanya on the Global Ecosystem Atlas work using AI. I know that Geo was also working on that, but I think they used an example of map of ecosystem types from Mozambique, South Africa, and Malawi to trial the process. So I wanted to check with you, how does that compare with the work that you are getting from AI?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, they're the Global Ecosystems Atlas partnership is this partnership with us, with Google, with a group on Earth observations, with Esri, and with the Allen Institute for AI, and the science team at the James Cook University are using Alpha Earth Foundations to build a basically a platform that shows, web accessible platform for the ecosystems, the first crack of ecosystem maps, right? The first IUCN Get Level 3 ecosystems. If they're not already available, the science team at JCU is sort of producing that, and then using Alpha Earth, it would become locally refinable at a country by country basis. So if you know specifically where your ecosystems are, you change and revise and update and then resubmit the improved map at either the national level or a smaller jurisdiction. So that's at a very high level. I didn't have that much time to go deep into the process, but they expect to have the sort of first iteration, the first version of the ecosystem maps by COP17, and then figuring out a way how or providing a method, providing a system, a platform by which people can customize the maps and make them more locally relevant. I do know, though, however, they are engaging with a number of countries directly right now, right? And in the application of Alpha Earth Foundations and satellite embeddings. And so if that's something of interest, I would be thrilled to connect you with the team.
Yeah, would love that. Thank you.
Great, will do.
All right, everyone. I think for the sake of time, I think it's an opportune moment to stop the Q&A and just, I guess, thank the speakers for their time, for the rich presentations as well. I hope that the conversation continues. Please share your emails and again, strengthen this collaboration across borders and between partners and just to flag that the hack, we are developing a number of capacity building activities and actions in 2026. This is in part an element of a broader continuum. And on behalf of the Hack Secretariat, thank you so much for your engagement today. And thank you once again to all our speakers. Wishing you a restorative end of year and a strong start to 2026. But before I end, just want to highlight, we have an updated 30 by 30 solutions toolkit. This is in collaboration with TNC and IUCN WCPA. And here we have also an updated space on areas of particular importance for biodiversity, where we highlight a summary, global guidelines, and we have a set of interactive resources. So if anyone would like to submit additional resources for this toolkit, for practitioners, government officials who want to gain additional insights in terms of 30 by 30 and overall target 3, please feel free to contact me and we will upload these resources. So to that end, again, wishing you a great end of year and a strong start to 2026. Yes, Paulina, actually, let me share it right now. Here. And of course, we will be sharing a recap of the meeting shortly. And thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Hermenegildo. Thank you, Chiara. Appreciate it so much, the time.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Yep. Bye then.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.